The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Very, very exciting David Pakman Show announcement. We are going to be moving to a much better time slot on Free Speech TV starting tomorrow, August 20th. We've been on at 2 a.m. Eastern Time, 11 p.m. on the West Coast, and we will be moved up 3 hours. We will now be airing daily on Free Speech TV, 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific Time. Very exciting stuff, of course. If you are one of the over 30 million subscribers to DirecTV or Dish Network, you get the David Pakman Show on Free Speech TV. Check that out. Exciting news, and so exciting, Lewis, that I want to make sure today's show is particularly good. So I will waste absolutely no time getting into our top story today. Glenn Greenwald's partner, David Miranda, has been detained for 9 hours at a British airport under the 2000 Terrorism Act. Now, to get you up to speed on this, Glenn Greenwald is the journalist who was involved with Edward Snowden he interviewed Snowden and kind of participated and wrote the article that initially announced the revelations of Edward Snowden to the world. David Miranda is Glenn Greenwald's partner. Both of them reside in Brazil, and David Miranda was traveling through London's Heathrow Airport, as many people do, as my dad did just days ago. Typically, you get through there with no real issues. That was not the case for David Miranda, who was stopped. All of his stuff was taken, including video games, his computer, everything he had with him, and he was detained for about 9 hours. And there is, of course, no question at all what this was about. This was about seeing if he had any documents or information that authorities could seize that might be in some way connected to the investigation and all of the controversy surrounding his partner, Glenn Greenwald, vis-a-vis Edward Snowden. Glenn Greenwald has said detaining my partner was a failed attempt at intimidation. At the time a security official called me, David had been detained for 3 hours. The security official told me that they had the right to detain him for up to 9 hours in order to question him, at which point they would either arrest and charge him or ask a court to extend the questioning time. The official refused to give his name and would only identify himself by his number, 203-654, said that David was not allowed to have a lawyer present, nor would they allow me to talk to him. Now, a bunch of politicians and an international reviewer are understandably raising questions about why he was detained for these 9 hours. I got an email, Lewis, from viewer Matt Broomfield, and he said, "What a disgusting example of the overreach of the U.S. government via its allies to intimidate all who embarrass it." Do you agree with Matt, Lewis? Is that what this is about?
It would certainly seem so. I can't think of any other reason that this would happen. I don't really know what to add to that.
Brazil is saying that Brazil is complaining that this was completely without justification. I think that what's going on here is that agencies around the world are so completely turned upside down by the leaks, as unsurprising as I've said they are. In other words, the content of the leaks was really not surprising. But officials and authorities and agencies are so upside down because of the leaks, because of the fact that one that they would consider to be one of their own would do this, that they do not know what to do, Lewis. And detaining Glenn Greenwald's partner is not going to do anything to help their cause, whatever it is. And I actually think that the intimidatory effect that they hope it will have on others who might seek to do something similar to what Edward Snowden did is going to be far outweighed by the fact that this is going to anger people even more and make them side with Edward Snowden even more. I think this is totally counterproductive.
Of course, when you do stupid stuff like this, it's going to have the opposite effect that you think it's going to have. It's going to anger people more, and it's going to want more people like who are in a position like Snowden was to do their worst or their best, however you look at it.
I think you're completely right. We're going to continue following what happens. And Glenn Greenwald now has also promised, as a result of this, more leaks related to intelligence organizations. He probably had those leaks planned anyway, to be completely honest. Otherwise, if he had newsworthy leaks ready, you would think that it was just a matter of time before we would hear about those. We'll continue to follow it. Very, very interesting and sad story over the weekend. Story going viral of Kansas City sports writer Martin Manley, who killed himself on his 60th birthday. And he left an extensive website that kind of went through his life. It went through his views on a number of issues. And it also explained why he decided to take his own life on his 60th birthday. And at the same time that it is incredibly sad, it is incredibly compelling. I spent a bunch of time, Lewis, over the weekend checking out some of the stuff that was said on this website. The website itself has been taken down. It apparently was in violation of, I think it was hosted on Yahoo, the Yahoo Terms of Service. But that being said, the website was copied and it's mirrored on a number of other websites, and you could certainly find it if you dig around a little bit. And the long and the short of it is that Martin Manley killed himself in part because he felt that he did not like the effects that aging was having on him. He talked about forgetting things and kind of told a couple of anecdotes as far as that goes. And he also said he believed he had gotten to a point where he has contributed most or all of what he will contribute during his lifetime already. That in his first 60 years, the society and this planet, this universe, really got just about everything that they're going to get from him, and that therefore it made no sense for him to continue living. And it's written in a way that is incredibly cold and sober, and it really is something else. Clearly, he had been preparing this website for a long time. He had prepaid hosting on the website for a while, and that's kind of the backstory there. Now, some people, like for example, Will Oramus on Slate, says that this is troubling. And it says this is a troubling template for 21st century suicide notes. If this starts to become a trend, a way that people think, hey, instead of just committing suicide and leaving a note that my family sees and maybe is reported on somewhere if there's a story about what I do, I can actually put together a website and I can have anything I want on that website and I leave that, and it's a way to get a lot more attention from my suicide. And the concern, of course, is that somebody might, if they're not in the right state of mind where they are thinking of committing suicide, the idea of this online shrine that they can create for themselves might be something that pushes them to, rather than seek help, to commit suicide. What's your thought on this, Lewis? What's your thought on the website that Martin Manley left? What was your reaction to reading about it?
Certainly an unusual way to go. It is pretty sad. Personally, I don't feel as strongly about suicide as a lot of other people. I think in the distant future, people in certain places in the world, people will probably just have the option of ending their lives.
Well, interesting you say that. I just recently read a book by Philip K. Dick, and I apologize, I forget the name of it, but the book basically is a society where death is fetishized, and we have it's a situation where there's total population control. There is, when one person dies, there is an embryo, a stored embryo, which is brought to life. It's one out, one in. And death in that society is fetishized. You have to read it to kind of understand all of the details. So you bring up kind of an interesting point there, Lewis. Now, I want to remind you of something else, Lewis. I don't know. I've brought this up on the show once or twice before. And in the past, you said you assume you were just joking when you said it. But it's an interesting thing nonetheless. When we were 12 or 13 years old, Lewis once said, and I remember where the discussion took place, and I remember who else was there. One of our friends, Peter, was there. Lewis said, I don't want to be old. When I turn 60, I'm going to kill myself. And 60 is an interesting number because that's the same thing that Martin Manley did in practice here. Number one, Lewis, do you even remember that now? And at the time, you really weren't joking, although maybe it was the type of thing where you hadn't really thought it through. What's your view on that type of thing now?
I vaguely remember that. Yeah, I remember having those thoughts when I was really young. But you're looking back on it, there are plenty of 60-year-olds who are very active. It's stupid cliche, but 60 is the new 50, right?
Right, 60 is the new 40 maybe, who knows?
Yeah, who knows? And we'll see what happens in terms of medical advancements, anti-aging advancements.
All right, but in other words, in your mind, it wouldn't be. You're not saying you don't advocate suicide, but in your mind, if you're in a state where you really are having poor quality of life, really, it's kind of a pro-euthanasia type argument, is it not?
Yeah, I think it is, and I agree with that. I stand by that.
All right, so what are your thoughts on Lewis's view here? Not the whole thing for when he was 12 and he said when he's 60 he'll kill himself, but just this idea of assisted suicide really is what we're talking about when quality of life has seriously declined. Last week, we were talking about terror alerts, and when we hear Al-Qaeda is interested in making some kind of a strategic strike this week, or whenever we hear these types of messages. And I wondered whether those types of messages are used strategically by governments, by authorities for various reasons. It could be, as we saw a long time ago, the threat of terrorism used to invade Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11. Or it could be to justify surveillance methods that individuals are increasingly feeling negative towards. Whatever the case may be, the question is, are those types of fears used to feed the terrorism industrial complex? And just yesterday, Alternet put together a fascinating article, 5 companies that make money by keeping people afraid of terror attacks. And it goes through them, and I'll quickly go through them. There's, of course, the Chertoff Group, Michael Chertoff. They, after the underwear bomber, they were able to score a really big contract for those porno radiation scanners that were used in many airports for a while. Now some are actually being removed. Booz Allen Hamilton. You should be familiar with this one by now. Of course, Edward Snowden should remind us of Booz Edward Hamilton. It is a contractor that provides any number of services to the NSA. The more afraid people are, the more willing they are to be surveilled, and therefore companies like Booz Allen Hamilton make more money. Science Applications International Corporation, sometimes referred to as NSA West, because so many former NSA employees actually go to work for this company. They make a ton of cash off government contracts, and they are experts in combating the terrorist threat. What that means, I don't know. A lot of money being made there. The Center for Counterintelligence Security Studies. Now, this is interesting because there's, of course, the kind of contractors that do stuff, but there's also companies that do analysis and think tanks and these types of companies, and they profit a lot from training law enforcement, from doing all sorts of sidebar stuff that is fueled by the global war on terrorism as it's being fought in the U.S. And the number 5, Security Solutions International. This is a private firm which talks about how they do anti-Muslim training for law enforcement. They make a lot of money off of the fear of Muslims and needing to defend ourselves from Muslims. This is real, Lewis. And if Americans were less afraid of terrorism, there would be a lot less willingness to accept the types of stuff that goes on as a result of these contractors, and hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars would literally be lost. So I think we can say with certitude, to quote Anthony Weiner, that fear of terrorism fuels a lot of money changing hands and a lot of money being made.
And I'm sure that's exactly what is being said at board meetings, what CEOs are telling their underlings at companies like this. And, you know, there's a lot of money being made here, but this is chump change compared to the stuff that's happening with Lockheed and weapons manufacturers for the military.
Of course, I mean, that industry, the thing is that industry, most people know that industry is completely bought and sold and caters to terrorism and war and makes money off of death. This is kind of one that's a little more shadowy, since a lot of these companies people haven't heard of. Be aware of it. This is going on. Think about it when you think about the terrorism industrial complex. One of the arguments against any kind of social welfare program from right-wingers always involves fear-mongering about so-called freeloaders, people who either obtain benefits without qualifying for them or deliberately avoid earning money because they'd rather just qualify for benefits and get benefits. One example of this, in fact, is Ronald Reagan's welfare queen story, which turned out to be about a completely made-up woman. I don't even remember the details. She was having children specifically to get more food stamp money or whatever the case was. Turned out to be made up. We also heard this during the 2012 presidential campaign on the Republican side when it came to discussions of so-called entitlements and welfare programs. It now turns out that it's really just a complete ruse. We've known for a while that a lot of those criticisms are based in kind of xenophobia and bigotry, right? Because implicit in the criticism of those who are on social welfare programs being lazy is the implication, the connection that it's minorities that are lazy. So we're kind of familiar with that. But there's an interesting new study that's out from the Department of Agriculture, which says that in 2010, nearly 51 million American incomes were low enough to qualify for SNAP. However, only 38 million actually received benefits. So there were millions, tens of millions of Americans who qualified for food stamps but did not apply. Now, why is this? Some people simply don't know that they're eligible. Others, the process may be difficult to navigate. And for some people, it is, of course, the stigma associated with being on those programs. But Lewis, more and more evidence, hard data, the idea that broadly speaking, the problem with these social welfare programs is that people are scrambling to qualify and to stay out of a well-paying job in order to be able to get food stamp money, which is paltry, to be completely honest, is completely false. It's completely based in stereotypes, prejudice, and just really bears no bearing on the reality of the situation.
Right. And I think a lot of politicians probably know that, yet they want to use it as a distraction because they don't want to focus on the real problems like defense spending, things of that nature. And, of course, there are people who take advantage of the system. You're always going to have that. But clearly, there are plenty of people who are too proud to use it.
Let's focus on making people don't need to even look for these programs, right? I mean, that was the top priority of Republicans when they took over the House, jobs. And we've seen nothing done on that. We've seen a lot of blocking President Obama's bills. Today on the bonus show, I went to a wedding over the weekend. It was a Catholic Mass. I will talk about my experience in the Catholic Mass and a lot of the sidebar that went along with it. We also have a lot of great stories that we're going to hear from Lewis. DavidPakman.com/membership. Support the show. We're mostly funded by individual members to the show who get the bonus show and lots of other great benefits. We'll be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. If you're worried about liberal bias and statistics, facts, other reality-based things, find out how to unskew reality at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Kevin Dupuy. Kevin Dupuy, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member, and you can also be a David Pakman Show member, and we'll welcome you on air. DavidPakman.com/membership. Amazon items, as you know, if you go to our website, DavidPakman.com, and click on the Amazon banner, any shopping you do on Amazon sends the David Pakman Show somewhere between a 7 and 8% kickback. Really thousands of items a month at this point are being purchased through that, and we like to go through some of the quirkier items. Now remember, we don't get any personally identifying information from Amazon. All we get is a list of items purchased, the cost, and the little commission that the David Pakman Show gets. Lewis, this week I want to talk about a very particular item that I was shocked to see so commonly ordered through our Amazon link. Those V for Vendetta masks. Aren't they also known as Guy Fawkes masks?
Yeah, well, it's Guy Fawkes. It's the guy who tried to blow up Parliament.
Right. And the number, I don't know like if you take a random sample of Americans, what portion of Amazon purchases are Guy Fawkes V for Vendetta masks, but I assure you it has to be lower than the number of items the number of those masks being purchased by our audience. And I know the anonymous thing, anonymous using those masks sometimes for demonstrations, but I was shocked, Lewis, 10 or 15 V for Vendetta masks a month are being purchased just through our Amazon link. I'm completely shocked by it.
That is pretty crazy. I hope it doesn't put us under the microscope by the feds or anything like that.
Yeah, I hope not. Let's talk about Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck had a reaction to this rodeo clown. There was a rodeo clown who was wearing a Barack Obama mask. Okay, and the clown was fired by the fair organizers for the fair he worked for because he did a performance that was, number one, not approved, and number two, it offended a lot of people in the audience because it was riddled with African-American stereotyping and prejudice and all sorts of stuff, and Glenn Beck does not like it, and most interestingly, Glenn Beck is considering the rodeo clown not only an artist, but a very serious artist. Take a look at Glenn Beck's comments.
You know, people burn books, and we had the McCarthy era where you were silenced because you were a communist. I got news for you. You may not see rodeo clowns as art or entertainment, but it is. This is an artist, a very brave artist, believe it or not, rodeo clowns. They could get mauled by a bull at any time. Just like I don't see the big blue paintings in the Met, or I mean in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I don't see that as like art. A lot of people do. I don't say, how dare you take that art out of here? That's not art. No. This is art, believe it or not. This is entertainment, believe it or not. And you might not like it, but aren't we supposed to stand up for the things that we don't like?
So basically, Glenn Beck is here, kind of this is the normal shtick from Glenn Beck, and he connects the rodeo clown being a serious artist to John Lennon and 9/12 and all sorts of crazy stuff. Lewis, Glenn Beck here seems to not be supporting freedom. I thought Glenn Beck was for freedom, and he seems completely against the freedom of the fair organizers to fire the rodeo clown with the Obama mask for doing something that was not approved and offended a lot of people. I thought Glenn Beck was for liberty and freedom.
Well, only when it suits his needs, of course.
Yeah, I guess so. Art and entertainment, by the way, are two different things. A rodeo clown that satirically mocks the president through racist undertones, I guess you could make the argument that it's a type of art, but it is certainly not the type of thing that you could legally say, I was wrongfully terminated because I did a racist impersonation of the president as a rodeo clown, completely outside of the scope of my job. That's just my view on that. If you disagree, you let me know. If you think that Glenn Beck is right here, that the rodeo clown was unfairly discriminated against, then let me know, and we can kind of have that discussion. This is an article by Radley Balko on Huffington Post, and it's about SWAT teams raiding an organic farm. This is a small organic farm in Arlington, Texas, and it was the target of a huge police raid last week, and it included aerial surveillance via helicopter, a SWAT raid, a 10-hour search, and members of the local police showed up, and they had a search warrant for some marijuana plants, okay? Turns out they found no marijuana plants at the Garden of Eden farm, but they did find some 17 blackberry bushes, which they seized, 15 okra plants, 14 tomatillo plants, and some native grasses and sunflowers. The problem seems to be, Lewis, that they had some code violations. The grass was too tall. They had some bushes growing too close to the street. Okay, here's the deal. Number one, the over-militarization of police has become completely ridiculous. And the argument here is that there were some felony-level offenses, and that when that's the case, you show up armed with a full raid team. In this case, it was a SWAT team. But number two is the cover reason, the reason originally cited to do the raid, which is they thought that there was marijuana there. Even if that were true, it is completely absurd that today in America, that warrants a SWAT team with helicopters and a 10-hour raid. It is disgusting and pathetic, Lewis.
Yeah, and this doesn't surprise me at all that this happened in Texas, of course. It's part of that whole drug paranoia, right. I think, really, that is not happening in a lot of other places in the country.
Let's focus on poverty. Let's focus on corporate corruption. Let's focus on even using marijuana to find cures or to treat conditions, right? The way many states are actually doing militarized SWAT army-style raids for some marijuana plants, and it turns out to be code violations. There were blackberry bushes too close to the street, Lewis. Send in the choppers and the AK-47s. It's absurd, and we're trying to get Radley Balko, the author of that article, who was a guest on this show years ago, to join us to talk more about this. And we've talked to Dennis Campbell about over-militarization of police forces. Let's take a break. Next, we'll talk to John Guandolo, former FBI agent who claims CIA Director John Brennan is a Muslim. What evidence does he have? I'll ask him next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Joining me today is John Guandolo. He's a former FBI agent, also co-author of the book Sharia, The Threat to America, and author of the soon-to-be-released book Raising a Jihadi Generation, a handbook for law enforcement, military, and intelligence professionals. You can find out more at understandingthethreat.com. So John, it's really great to have you here. I'm fascinated by your career and your story. We actually first came across your name when we were doing a story about Glenn Beck talking about CIA Director John Brennan is secretly a Muslim. And we researched that claim, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you seem to be the kind of original source on that idea. Am I wrong or right about that?
No, that is correct, and thanks for having me on.
So how did you come up with that theory? Was it during your time at the FBI or after that you developed that?
No, well, I wouldn't call it a theory. It's two of the individuals that were over in Saudi Arabia when he was over there that are still in government service witnessed him take the Shahada, which is what you say to become a Muslim. While he was the CIA station chief in Saudi Arabia.
So who are those two individuals?
Well, I'm not going to tell you that. They're still in government service, and they would be fired if their names were public.
Okay, and let's say, even if you did tell, just for a second, like you're not going to tell us their name, but let's say you told us their names. What proof would they have that he is a Muslim?
Their own testimony that they were there, present.
So they don't. There's nothing other than just that them saying they were there, right?
No, well, I mean, government records would show they were there in time of service at the time he was there, and they were present.
So in other words, if we were able to see the records, there would be records that show that the two individuals whose names you won't tell us were in the same place as John Brennan at a particular point in time, right?
Right.
And then what would that tell us about him converting to Islam?
That necessarily wouldn't tell you anything other than their testimonies, which would be that they witnessed him saying the Shahada.
Okay.
And my question would be, why isn't anybody just ask him, did you take the Shahada? That's all.
Tell me, let's talk about, well, that's an interesting question. Would there be anything bad? Let's say you're right, okay? Let's say these sources you won't tell us, who even if we knew their names would have no evidence about this. Let's say it was all true and John Brennan was a Muslim. What would be bad about that? In other words, is it illegal for people who work in American government to be Muslims?
No, but we do have a requirement that you're competent. And the focal point of the story, and I suspect you know when you read and researched that, wasn't simply that he converted. It's that he converted as a sitting station chief for the CIA in Saudi Arabia, and the people who brought him to that were employees of the Saudi government and the Saudi intelligence service. That's a recruitment operation. And that shows that he is not competent or professional to be CIA, a station chief, number one. Number two, the director of Central Intelligence for sure. And I would argue he has no business having a security clearance.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that you're kind of tying in a lot of conjecture and personal opinions. In other words, it's your opinion. I mean, here, let me just in the interest of presenting another idea, and then you can tell me where I'm wrong.
Okay.
A lot of people would say, listen, John Brennan was arguably already pretty sympathetic to Middle Eastern culture, to Islam, before he even entered Saudi Arabia. That's why he was placed there. And would the Bush White House really give him such a high-ranking position if they thought that he was in some way compromised the way you're describing? It doesn't seem to make too much sense.
Well, I mean, the Bush administration gave Muslim brothers senior positions in the government, so I don't know that argument holds water. He was already very sympathetic, not just I think to the Middle East, but that's starting there, but even to the Muslim Brotherhood. and Hamas and others. And that's the problem. You know, one of the articles, one of the most supportive articles of the report that I did about John Brennan came out of the Middle East. And their whole argument was because of the fact that Mr. Brennan was allowed to go to Mecca, he had to be a Muslim because non-Muslims aren't allowed there. And they reported that. I didn't report that.
Okay, but just for our purposes, I want to focus on your reports because I only have you here. So let's see if we can focus on that a little bit.
Okay.
Is your sense that do you think that Glenn Beck and other journalists, mostly right-wing journalists, are irresponsible when they repeat a story that you presented without giving the names of your sources and without those sources even having any kind of physical evidence that this even took place? Isn't it very irresponsible from a journalistic standpoint of someone like Glenn Beck to assume that you're right?
I'm going to leave that to you guys to discern whether reporters that put this out there beyond what I put out, that's up to you to come up, you know, with what you think of your fellow journalists. I will say this. There's an easy answer here. Why doesn't a responsible journalist ask John Brennan, did you take the Shahada when you were in Saudi Arabia? That's it. Just ask him and see what he says. And if he flat out denies it, then we have a discussion that we can have. But if he says yes, then this interview here becomes moot because he either has to lie, because I know for a fact the two people that are in government service are extremely trustworthy and have very stellar careers.
So you've never had a situation where someone you believe to be trustworthy turned out not to be trustworthy. You've never heard of that in your life.
Oh, of course I've heard of that.
So is it possible then that these two individuals could also fall under that category, but you just don't know yet?
I think when you take the preponderance of the facts, not conjecture, not theory, the preponderance of the facts, what has Mr. Brennan done since he's been in government service? Everything he's done, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, has been pro-Muslim Brotherhood, pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah in both policy, giving speeches, positive speeches at with known significant leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood here in the United States.
But what about all of the Christian members of Congress that are also supporting the Muslim Brotherhood financially and otherwise? Are they all Muslims too? Is that evidence that they are Muslims? I mean, in both cases, you personally have no evidence that either converted to Islam. So why aren't you talking about those members of Congress?
You keep saying that there's no evidence. When you have witnesses, you know, I was an FBI agent, we take this stuff to court.
Yeah.
You have two people testifying to the exact same thing with the exact same details.
Right, but you don't have court testimony. You won't even tell us their names, and all they have is the fact that they say it. There's no evidence at all, and we don't even know who you're talking about.
Well, right, for the very reason that if I were to give you their names, their crap would be packed today, and they'd be out of the government.
Right.
Because of how hostile this message is, primarily because of men like John Brennan. You can't teach about the Muslim Brotherhood and Sharia law inside the government anymore, primarily because of John Brennan. Our foreign policy towards Libya and Syria, we supported Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood in Libya, and now we're doing it in Syria, primarily because of John Brennan. So when you ask what the evidence is, the evidence is our government is directly supporting Al-Qaeda. That's the evidence.
Okay, yeah. I mean, our government supported any number of brutal regimes, and it had nothing to do with John Brennan being a Muslim. But
this does, and I'm not saying. Let me be clear. I'm not saying we supported Al Qaeda because John Brennan's a Muslim.
Oh, okay. I'm
saying when you look at the totality, there are individuals. Yes, I'm not naming them. I get that, and I get your issue with that. But they have given specific information that he said the Shahada while he was a station chief in Saudi Arabia, that he did it after a relationship was built with him by individuals in Saudi intelligence. It's a recruitment operation. He's so naive that he allowed himself to get put in that position. That's my concern.
All right, fair enough. No. I think we've heard it, and I wish we had more time. You've made your case, and I think the audience will decide. And of course, they can find out more at understandingthethreat.com. People can find out about the new book, Raising a Jihadi Generation. We have been speaking with John Guandolo. I wish we had more time, but I appreciate you coming on and talking to me about it.
Thanks, David. I really appreciate you having me too, and I do appreciate the discussion.
Thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We don't often talk about sports on the David Pakman Show, but every once in a while we do. We have Dave Zirin on, sports editor from The Nation, and here's an interesting story that's been developing really kind of in our backyard. As much of our audience knows, Lewis, we are on this program fans of the Boston Red Sox, the Boston Celtics, and the New England Patriots. Yesterday, the New York Yankees were in town to play a three-game series, well, the last game of a three-game series against the Red Sox, and on the Yankees is Alex Rodriguez, who has been at the center of a steroid controversy, admitting to using steroids again. And legally speaking, this counts as A-Rod's first infraction because the previous infraction to which he admitted took place when he was on the Texas Rangers before the current kind of ground rules were set, before the counter was reset to 0. So while most individuals who are clear thinking realize that A-Rod is a habitual and career steroid user, from the point of view of the Major League Baseball Association, it is of Major League Baseball, he is a first-time offender. And as such, he was allowed to appeal a suspension, which will now allow him to continue playing, as are the rules from the Major League Baseball Players Association. He can continue playing until the appeal is held, which will not be until after the end of the season, most likely. Many players angry with this because it is allowing the Yankees to potentially have a different outcome than they would if A-Rod was serving the sentence. So those are the rules, though. However, it didn't stop the controversy yesterday at Fenway Park. A-Rod booed very heavily when coming up to bat, chants of "you're a cheater," and then hit first pitch thrown by Ryan Dempster going behind A-Rod's legs, and then the next one hitting him. Many individuals believing that it was an intentional hitting a batter. Others saying, no, it was just an accident. Take a look at the video. So I have to say, Lewis, I don't like Alex Rodriguez. Of course, I'm part of the whole Red Sox-Yankees thing that everybody who is a fan of either team is kind of a part of, to the extent that I like the rivalry. But going out there and taking it into your own hands, if it is true that this was an intentional beating of a batter, which the Red Sox, at least yesterday, said it was not, I don't think that this is really the way forward, as compelling and fascinating as the story is getting. And by the way, it backfired. A-Rod ending up hitting the home run later in the game that ended up starting the rally for the Yankees that won the game. So I am against this type of thing.
I am too. It's pretty ridiculous. Yeah, it's hard to tell by watching it if it's intentional or not. I mean, generally these pitchers are pretty accurate and pretty good at avoiding that type of thing.
And two pitches in a row so far outside, and some arguing that Dempster should have been thrown out. But only warnings being issued by the umpire to both benches. It was interesting to watch, I have to say.
Yeah, but it should really never come to that. I mean, if these guys want to, hop in a ring, let them do that.
That's a different sport.
There. If I were A-Rod, honestly, I probably would have charged the mound with the bat in my hand.
I actually think A-Rod did, even though he's a steroid user, he did the right thing, which is stay calm, come back. If he charges the mound, he probably gets thrown out. Instead, he starts the rally that wins the game.
Connection problems, David. Couldn't hear you there.
Instead, he comes back and hits the home run that ends up winning the game. So I think actually A-Rod did the better thing for his team. Here's an interesting question: who would you prefer running your neighborhood watch? The KKK or George Zimmerman? Some people in Springfield, Missouri's West Central side got invitations on their front lawns saying that the KKK, the traditionalist American Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, are launching a neighborhood watch program. The flyer says, "Are there troubles in your neighborhood? Contact the Klan today." And some neighbors saying they didn't want the paperwork at all. Others saying the KKK are cowards. Why not bring the paperwork to our doors? And then we'll tell you to your face that we aren't interested. Who would you prefer run your neighborhood watch program? George Zimmerman or the KKK? I think if I had to choose between George Zimmerman and the KKK running my neighborhood watch, it would be it's like Sophie's Choice. It really sounds horrible. I think that in a sense I would prefer the KKK only because George Zimmerman was able to kind of just fly under the weather and nobody knew who he was. He wasn't a known entity. And that's probably part of why he took the attitude and point of view that he did, and he was able to kind of sneak around. Everybody knows what the KKK is. If the KKK runs your neighborhood watch, you are completely under suspicion all the time, and you're probably able to get away with less. That's just my view. If you have a different view, you just let me know. Let's go to your voicemail. 219-2DavidP is our voicemail number. Call it any time of day. Here's an interesting voicemail about an analogy that can be used regarding climate change. Take a listen to this. This is interesting.
Hi, David. I was just watching your Republican rep calls global warming a total fraud clip here on August 15th. And I just wanted to, I do an environmental radio show here in Canada, and I just wanted to give you a useful tool to sort of help explain climate change when you're talking about stuff like that.
Yeah.
When he's talking about there isn't enough there isn't enough science to show that, climate change is true long term, the best way to deal with something like that is to explain that at this point, the rate of carbon is affecting climate is similar to thinking about a car speeding down the road during a very foggy day. Once we start going over a certain speed limit, we don't need to essentially know how far away the wall is, only that we're traveling too fast to be able to stop before we hit it at the speed we're currently traveling. That is the best way that I've found to describe the danger of climate change, and is very, very useful, I found.
I like that. That's a really good analogy. Excellent stuff. And also a voicemail about our Hatriot Mail segment.
Hi, my name is Gordon from Eugene, Oregon, and I'm on your mailing list, and I really enjoy getting videos from you.
All right.
And watching your show. But what I don't like, a terrible downside to your show, which you were playing, the latest video I got, is a lot of the deleterious and slanderous emails that you get. I don't know why through modern means you don't screen all those out. They don't, you can do it via phone or email. You should screen all that out.
Yeah, it's not really an issue of not having the technical capability to screen them out. I think it's important for our audience to know that what we're doing here, a lot of people really, really dislike. And I think it is also funny to present it rather than me reading those emails, to have a professional voiceover artist read them. So I think it's not a question of screening. We're completely up to speed on the technical logistics of screening stuff out. It's more a matter of we think it actually adds something. People seem to be reacting positively. So that's basically what it is. That's going to do it for today. Please become a David Pakman Show member, davidpakman.com/membership. It is our #1 source of funding for the program. See you tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.